Hello, my name's Tom Kyle. The date's the 27th of the 10th, 2013. I want to make a video today, very quick video, just to make a bit of a recommendation of things that I think people would be very interested to listen to. Probably one of the most popular topics of YouTube videos is 9/11 and obviously various theories about how it was pulled off. And obviously it's one of these subjects that actually can be very interesting because these towers were really massive and like a lot of stuff just didn't make any sense. And then all the other things that happened on 9/11, Building 7, etc., etc. The BBC reporting Building 7 falling down when it hadn't fallen down, it was behind the woman. And then afterwards she had the audacity to sort of say, it doesn't matter, it just came through on the news wire, so I said it. So you're not a journalist if you just say anything, are you now? Obviously, if you know, that's how the news works. It's a complete joke. And she was like she's venomously aggressive to people who like pick her up on it. She never said, I'm sorry, I've misled you, or I've done a really bad job, we shouldn't use newswires, or I was told to do it, I didn't have any choice. Very aggressive, obnoxious cunt of a woman. Anyway, right, this is my recommendation. Anybody who doesn't want to spend a lot of time looking into it, there's various different people who you might want to look at. For instance, there's a guy called Danny Jenkow. Now, he's basically the world's eminent demolitions expert. I think he's Dutch or something. Now, somebody showed him a picture of Building 7 falling down. He said that's controlled demolition. Danny Jenkow got run over a few days later. He was murdered, quite clearly. So Danny Jenkow is an interesting person. There's also this Russian, and this Russian believes, I forget what his name is, he was in some kind of anti-nuclear arms section in the Russian military, and they'd been told that there were nuclear weapons underneath the Twin Towers on a kind of like little rail system, and they were kept below Building 7, and they would go underneath the other buildings, and they were set to sort of demolish them. Not for any other reason, I believe, not for sort of false flag terrorism reasons, but because if these buildings are so big, it'd be impossible to knock them down via conventional demolition, which I don't necessarily believe is true. I don't think that's true, but it was something to do with that. Or if America ever got taken over, they could actually blow up some of these buildings because they'd have these little secret nuclear bombs. You could blow them up. Now, I'm in a total state of uncertainty about nuclear weapons. I don't know what the proliferation of them are. I don't know what countries have them. And when I say nuclear, I mean obviously enriched uranium, actual explosive ones, as opposed to depleted uranium type. The cheapo nuclear weapons that just give people cancer but don't make a big explosion. I mean, like the expensive, high-grade ones. I believe that probably the proliferation, it's just one of these things. It's kind of a mystery. I don't really know I haven't got an answer for it. Now, one thing I would recommend people have a look at is there's a guy called Bruce Cathy, Cathy. Now, he's a New Zealander. For a long time, this Cathy has been saying, and he's always done this with the approval, he says, of the New Zealand government, because he doesn't want to compromise national security there, that he believes that, and he reckons he's got research to prove this. I really couldn't be bothered to look into it, but he sounds plausible enough, and he's been around for a long time. I've never ever seen anybody actually kind of successfully make me think he's just talking rubbish. And what he says is he reckons that nuclear weapons can't just be shot at another country and they blow up. The way the nuclear weapon works is the world has to be in a certain alignment with the sun, and I think maybe the moon. It's something to do with gravity and stuff, and it won't blow up unless certain quite complex equations are in place. So it's a nuclear weapon, he reckons, like an explosive one. You can't just go around blowing them up. So you'd either have to shoot them in an extremely accurate manner, which is basically impossible, or you have to plant them first. And therefore, say the one in Hiroshima would have been planted, and the reason it went off at the time it did was nothing to do with military strategy dictating it. It had to be dictated by the curvature of the Earth and its alignment with the sun. And the thing is this, so it's quite interesting, this guy. So he says this idea that you can just go around shooting nuclear weapons in a kind of tactical manner, it's impossible. You have to wait for a certain date, and you'd have to blow them up, and you have to blow them up in a certain place at a certain time, at a certain height, otherwise they won't work. So that's very interesting. I think people should look into it. It's quite boring listening to him, but it does seem like he knows what he's talking about. So I'm not saying whether he's talking rubbish or not, but it does look like he may very well have a case. And this idea that nuclear weapons can just be shot about at random times could be complete rubbish. Right, now, the thing is, there's this Russian character, I forget his name, and he reckons that there's these nuclear weapons under the Twin Towers, and that's what they use. Now, I think In one way, I reckon that's possibly quite accurate. It could well be, because of course, if you look at the way they blew up, it doesn't look like a normal explosion. It looks slightly different, and of course, they didn't really fall down. It sort of just disappeared into nothingness. The other thing is, on the North Tower, I believe they had an aerial on the top. Now, the aerial sort of evaporates if you look at it on some of the photos. Now, there's absolutely no way in a million years that could just evaporate the way it did from any normal explosion. Now, I was thinking, if you had a bomb in the basement and you've got the lift shaft, and you know the lift shaft were the most solid parts of those buildings, the bomb would blow up the lift shaft, because it's like you can shape charge nuclear weapons, I'm told. So you could actually get it to shoot up the lift shaft, cause less resistance. It would go straight up the tower, and it would probably blow out the top of the building. If it's just a piece of metal, you can imagine, even though it's a big sturdy bit of metal, it could actually evaporate it. So that would actually explain that. That is consistent with it. The problem is that nuclear weapons, even though they could be made to sort of make things evaporate and disappear, not everything would evaporate and disappear, because of course with Hiroshima, for instance, you've got all these charred bodies and stuff. Like with 9/11, there were no charred bodies or anything like that, because you've also got the initial blast, evaporation, everything gets blown out. There would be a big explosion. 9/11, there wasn't a significantly big explosion with like mobile phones, toilets, windows, desks, lockers, filing cabinets, paper. All that stuff would have gone flying out all over the place, because if you made a big enough one to evaporate the entire building, which it wasn't big enough to, because you could see the sides fell down, you can't have it both ways. If it's a very small one in certain places and it just blows the whole lot down and the sides come down, or you got one that would and that would leave lots of residual bits and pieces everywhere. Or you'd get one that just blew the fuck out of it, and it would just go everywhere, and it would take out the rest of Manhattan as well, and then you could actually evaporate it. Now, obviously they found a couple of passports in there, but if you're an idiot enough to believe they actually found them, you're just beyond help. There's no point even like lowering the standard of sort of thinking down to your level. They didn't find any bits of phones or anything in there. Now, there's two reasons for this, and this is where it gets incredibly interesting, and this is where the recommendation comes from. I was listening to this radio show done by Jim Fetzer, which is recorded, and you get it off his website. That's JimFetzer. Jim Fetzer interviewed these two people called Phil Jayhan, Jayhan, and Larry McWilliams. Right now, he interviewed them quite a while ago. But the thing is, he's got that on his website under Jim Fetzer Real Deal Twin Towers Fakery, and Jim Fetzer Real Deal Twin Towers Fakery 2. Right, so that's the two names of the files you want to search. But Larry McWilliams and Phil Jayhan, I think that's what it's down as on his website. So if you go through the different pages of radio in his archives, you can find it on that, but otherwise it would be under the fakery ones. The thing with this is they do a very detailed account, and they explain all about how there was tons and tons and tons and tons of rubble not accounted for. So when the buildings fell down, instead of there being a massive pile of rubble like 12 or 13 stories high, it was only like 3 stories high. So where did all the concrete go? And that's just the concrete, working out the concrete. If it had been a conventionally demolished building, and when I mean that, I mean when you demolish a building, I've been on jobs where they've demolished stuff. You don't just blow it to pieces and then it's fine and you just put it all in bags. That's not how it works. Like, you take everything out of the building. So that's conventional means of demolishing a building. You take everything out, the carpets, everything, because those carpets, you might think, oh, what's the point? It's only a carpet. You take that out because when the concrete gets smashed, if the carpet's stuck to it and there's wires everywhere, all of that stuff will be getting twisted up, and the concrete will take up twice as much space. It's much, much easier. There's no economy in just blowing the place to smithereens. You've got to do all that stuff first, otherwise it's a right nightmare cleaning it up. That's the conventional way of doing it. You take obviously all the stuff out of it. We're meant to believe that they blew those buildings up with all the stuff in, and they basically explained there would be like something like 15,000 toilets or something like that, 15,000 this, 50. The pile of rubbish itself that wasn't in there, that should have been in there, would have made a pile bigger than the pile that was there. and also there'd be bits of phones lodged in windows, half a mile away and stuff. There was nothing like this on the day. So the thing is, they don't seem to really say what blew it up, but they don't seem to necessarily. They just don't really get drawn in. They just said it's been blown up. They said obviously it can't have been done by a plane because jet fuel can't burn concrete and can't melt concrete and it can't melt steel. So that's nonsense. Because otherwise, every time you had a barbecue, the barbecue would melt, wouldn't it? So that's obviously nonsense. And also there's a flash flame. So if the petrol tanks on the aeroplane blew up when it hit the building, there's a flash flame because they're blown up. There is no petrol, so it's bollocks. Right? So you can't have it both ways. You can either have a big explosion, or you don't get an explosion, and then all the jet fuel just goes in and sets on fire. So that's completely impossible. Now, the thing with them is they detail the fact all these different things that would have blown up. Then it gets even more. It gets mega more interesting. And this is where it gets, it has its wider ramifications. Is they sort of go onto this hollow towers aspect of it, and there's other very interesting things that they do. But they say that if you look at certain photos and if you put hollow towers right into the internet, you actually get pictures of this on Google image search. When the sun was shining through that building, the sun sort of goes through unabated, and it looks like half the floors don't even have floors on them. And it very much looks like the Twin Towers were never full. They were made to be blown up. And this is where it gets most interesting, because obviously they were blown up. It was an inside job of one capacity or another. Who the inside, how you define it inside, obviously, the people who built it, they'd be the same interest group, like whether it's America or it's Israel, whatever. They're all part of the same thing. They're not really getting into that. But the point is that lots of people were involved, because you've got people renting floors in that building, and it turns out there was nobody on that floor. Nobody went into work that day, all that stuff. It's incredibly interesting. If you listen to this interview they do, you'll be even if you're the most skeptical, disinterested person in it, every single thing they bang on about, they just go, this thing, and it's just like, that's impossible, this thing, that's impossible, this thing. And one of the very interesting things is Giuliani and this other guy, I forget who the other guy was, the day after 9/11 happened, the next day, the first interview he did, he goes, yeah, we got like at least 200 trucks worth of rubble. And they're like, what? That's the first thing he starts talking about in this interview. And so basically he admits destroying the crime scene, obviously, but he's talking about the rubble. And it's almost like Giuliani is scared that people are going to go, where the fuck did those Twin Towers go? They were really big. There's nothing left of them. There's something funny going on here. And the other guy who got interviewed, I can't remember, he was some kind of important bigwig in New York. He started banging on about 200 trucks worth of rubble's gone by the morning. Like, where'd you get the trucks from? All very strange, because at the time nobody really picked up on it, it would appear, but they were very concerned that they'd blown it to smithereens a bit too much, so there's not enough of it. So these Twin Towers, there was just this little lump on the floor now. So it's very, very interesting. And another big thing, of course, that you've got to remember is if they didn't use a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons at strategic points, absolutely, definitely, the bathtub, which was the nickname given to I think it was a secant pile wall and a kind of basically a concrete structure that keeps the Hudson River out of that part of New York where they built these big buildings. That would have got smashed to pieces and the Hudson River would have come into it. Now, if you go to, say, Liverpool, obviously the Liver buildings, they're nowhere near as big as the Twin Towers, but they're a big old building. In there, what they've got is they've got like a floodable basement. So there's a basement that fills up with water and fills out. So that was the old-fashioned way of dealing with it. The Twin Towers obviously built probably 100 years later, something like that. The tactic was you just kept the water out by putting like lots reinforced concrete all around underneath it, so the whole thing is just floating in this concrete bathtub. That's a good analogy. That's why it's called the bathtub. Now, if that was blown up with conventional explosives and this pancake theory going boom, 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 each time gathering more momentum, getting more bigger, when that hit the bottom, that would have just completely obliterated the bathtub without any question. So definitely the idea that it was just conventional explosives of a normal type is obviously nonsense. And also anything about thermite, maybe there was thermite, but again, there could have been the use of thermite, but again, it wouldn't make the whole thing fall down. It's completely impossible. That's just a ridiculous theory propagated by disinformation agents. So If you type in Hollow Towers, Phil Jayhan, Larry McWilliams, and on Jim Fetzer's show, very, very interesting. There's about 3 hours of listening there. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. If you ever listen to anything about 9/11, that's definitely the most interesting thing to listen to, because there's a lot of disinformation around it. And this stuff, it doesn't exactly hit the disinformation. It just ignores all the disinformation agent type stuff. It just talks about stuff which is just like sort of undeniably a very good point. And it just basically blows them out of the water without even mentioning them. I think it's very, very interesting. I think you should listen to it. I think you'll, if you're interested in just anything, even if you're not really interested in 9/11 and what happened, I think you will get a bit of a kick out of it. It's interesting. It's like one of the most interesting documentaries you've ever listened to. These are just two ordinary guys. They've just thought about it and they've come up with all this stuff. Extremely impressive. All right, thanks for listening. Tell me what you think. Thanks a lot. Bye.